Hey everyone, welcome back to Rebuilding the Snyderverse. This is the web series where we will be rebuilding the Snyderverse using the current DCEU, as well as adding new stories to it. This is episode 5, and today's episode is focused on the Flash film rewrite. I know that we don't know the entire story for the Flash film that is currently in production, but we do know some elements to the story already, and those elements do not fit the story I think the story should tell. So we start with the cast. The main cast would be Ezra Miller, Ben Affleck, and Ray Fisher. We will be seeing Ryan Choi in this story, however, he isn't a main character. There is a character that I would like you to assign an actor to, and that is the Reverse Flash. He will be one of the villains in this movie, so I want to know who you would cast for this role. The other villain would be Captain Cold, so let me know who you think should play that character too. The director will be Rick Famuyiwa. Sorry for butchering that name. Rick was the original director for the Flash film, however he left the role due to creative differences with Warner Brothers. Billy Crudup would be Henry Allen in this story. As some of you may know, he has been recast in the actual Flash film because of scheduling conflicts, but he would be Henry Allen in this version of the film. The budget would be $250 million due to a high amount of CGI and the cast that will be involved. I would have the actual composer for the Flash film composing this rewrite, that man being Benjamin Wallfish. The teaser for his Flash theme sounds really cool in my opinion and would fit this story too. Now, I have two ideas for this Flash film. We could easily tell the Flashpoint story, which is a very famous Flash story, but we could also go in a different direction. Now, I really like the Flashpoint story, but I thought I would give creating my own Flash story a go that connects to the Snyderverse. So, this story will be my attempt at a Flash story, but if you don't like it, then we can just use Flashpoint. Act 1 would start with a flashback to Barry's mother dying and his father going to prison, a bit like what we see in the Flash CW series. Future Flash wouldn't be there like in the series, so we just see a red streak of lightning zoom in and a yellow blur would appear in front of Nora Allen, who I would also like you to cast. A young Barry and his father would be in Barry's bedroom, chatting at the same time that Nora is murdered downstairs. Henry would be wrongfully accused of her murder, which would fuel Barry's obsession to become a CSI and prove his father's innocence. We would then jump to the modern day, where Barry is talking to Henry in prison about his first day at the police department. This would flow right from the Snyder Cut, where Barry told his father about his new job. Henry doesn't currently know about Barry being the Flash. We would then follow Barry back to his hideout, the same place in the Snyder Cut. As he walks in, he sees Cyborg, Ryan Choi, and Bruce Wayne, all huddled around a table. Barry asks if they have done it yet, and Ryan turns around and says yes, and holds up a ring. This would be the famous Flash ring that stores his suit. Next to them is the suit that we all know so far, the suit we see in Justice League. This is where they explain that Bruce got the highest quality material available, Ryan worked out how to use nanotechnology to get the suit inside the ring, and Victor worked on the design of the suit and used the equation for the Speed Force to utilize his speed. Barry tests out the ring, and this is where we see his brand new suit. The suit would be very similar to this fan art from De Trinity. It would also be very similar to the concept art for the actual Flash film, but he will be keeping his blue lightning. Cyborg tells Barry to try it out, and as he almost starts charging up his power, blue lightning courses through the suit, flowing round, the electric blue contrasting with the iconic scarlet red. The white of the circle and the gold of the lightning bolt glow as he uses his powers. Bruce says that with the specs that Barry gave them, they worked out how to make it the most aerodynamic and armoured suit possible. Bruce says how he used some of the armour technology he uses for his suit for Barry's. Now the beauty of this design is that none of it would have been possible without the genius of Barry Allen. He worked out everything he needed for the suit to protect him and to be aerodynamic, but he didn't have the funding before to create a better quality suit. So I like how the other three are able to help make that a reality. We would then see Barry running around Central City, stopping crime and testing his abilities. This is where Captain Cold would be introduced. This would be very early on in Leonard Snart's career as a criminal, so he wouldn't be as experienced or as powerful as he has been in the comics or TV shows. But by Barry's comments, they have fought before in the past. Barry would act slightly cocky due to his inflated confidence with his new suit, which causes him to get hit by Cold's gun. This is where Barry is forced to take the fight seriously. He then takes down Snart easily and sends him to prison. Now Snart is in prison, the story would focus on Barry being a CSI. We would see him cover a few cases and we would see his genius intellect in use. At this point in time, Barry had been working with Picture News, a Central City news outlet, to help him in his CSI work. Iris West was the main journalist he talked to for help. Obviously, Barry needing help for his CSI investigations was an excuse to talk to Iris, but they were getting closer. By the level of conversations they were having, would imply that they had been working together for a while, and had created a very strong relationship. It was visibly obvious that they liked each other. But this time, Barry actually needed her help on an investigation. We would then have a montage of Barry working through cases in his lab, and him balancing his job with being a superhero. He then finds the case of his father's conviction for his mother's murder, and starts going through it. This would be quite an emotional scene for Barry, and we would visibly see that on his face. As this montage went on, Barry would be narrating, explaining to Iris what he had been doing. He would describe his superhero work as volunteering, so that Iris wouldn't find out that he is the Flash. It would then cut back to them in her office, with Barry asking her if she would be able to do some investigating on his father's case. He said that the police department refused to do so, as it would be a waste of time. Iris felt uncomfortable and apologised to Barry for not being able to help. Barry would then leave and runs to Gotham to talk to Bruce, asking him if he can help in any way to get his father out of prison, legally, because he is innocent. Bruce would have a heart-to-heart with Barry. He believes him, but knows that the only legal way of getting him out of prison is to provide compelling evidence in court. Barry asks what if he was to run back in time and stop his mother's killer. Bruce says that he thinks it would destroy the timeline, and this is where we would see Cyborg come in and discuss the idea. Victor agrees that it would break the timeline and could cause catastrophic changes. Victor would explain the way time travel works in this universe. Zack Snyder had his own way of explaining how time travel worked in the DCEU universe, and it is something I really like. He explained how it worked when describing what his story was for Justice League 2, so I will let him explain it for you now.
Cyborg said to Bruce in the distant future, like, there's two windows. We had come up with this time traveling concept where basically the way the time traveling window worked is that it's not awesome physics and doesn't make any sense, but that you had to do a time jump when the Earth was in relatively the same spot, right? Because if you did a time jump and the Earth wasn't like in the same position in space, you would jump into space and just be like dead. And so, okay, so there's always like, so they had two windows, right, to do the jump. And Cyborg says like, which of these two windows do you think we should use? And Bruce was like, well, what window would you have put me through if you didn't ask? And he's like, this one. And then he's like, use the other one. Because that one you already did, and it was the wrong one. Barry Allen was in my freaking Batcave yelling at me about like nonsense. So you need to put him through that other one, because that's the one that will, because he had to jump right before Darkseid boom tubes into the Batcave to murder Lois, so you have to like, anyway.
Now you know how time travel works in the Snyderverse, we can continue with this story. So Cyborg works out when the Earth's orbit aligns with when Barry's mother died. It turns out it was in 5 days' time. They decided that they were going to try and identify Nora's killer, but after he had killed his mother. If he stopped her killer before her death, reality as we know it would change. Barry agreed to it, and they worked out how to control his time-travelling abilities. This would bring in the cosmic treadmill. Whilst Cyborg and Bruce worked on building it, Barry was running around the world collecting materials. They completed it 5 minutes before the orbits would align, and Barry, Bruce and Victor went over the plan one more time. They worked out that he needed to be there just after his mother's death so that there is no way he can stop her killer and destroy the current timeline. This upset Barry, but he understood why. Barry would arrive at his old house, identify who his killer was, and then travel back to the modern day so that they knew who it was and then they can find the evidence without damaging the timeline. Barry had a device attached to his chest that allowed him to direct him back to the modern day. Barry stepped onto the treadmill and the electric blue lightning coursed through the suit again. Bruce strangely emphasized to Barry to not interfere with anything that happens on that day. Just arrive, identify his mother's killer, and come back. Nothing else. Barry nodded, and as his speed started building, the lights in the Batcave flickered and then suddenly shut off. Just as blue lightning lighting up the room. Then in an instant, he disappeared. Everything up until this point could go towards a Flashpoint timeline. So if you don't like this story I'm about to tell, we can simply change it to the Flashpoint timeline. I just wanted to try something different and to see if you guys like it too. Now, back to the story. This would be the beginning of Act 2. Barry arrives as planned outside his childhood house. As he walks closer, he sees a yellow streak zoom into the house. Then, he hears a noise that haunts him, his mother's scream. Tears flood Barry's eyes before the yellow blur reappears outside his house. Now, fueled with anger, Barry goes in pursuit. An epic chase scene happens as we see Barry race after this yellow blur. The mix of red and blue lightning throughout Central City as Barry closes the gap between the two. We would then see a fight scene similar to the Injustice 2 video game between the Flash and Reverse Flash. But we would hear Barry asking Reverse Flash who he is and why did he kill Nora Allen. Now they would be talking in super speed, so I think it would be really cool to have an effect to their voices, to display that they are talking at that speed. The yellow blur would smile, mention how they have been doing this for centuries, and it would punch Barry in the chest and send him flying through a building. When Barry ran out of the building, the yellow blur had vanished. Barry looked down and saw his emblem sparking, displaying that his way back home had been damaged, and so for the time being, he was stranded in this time. We would then follow Barry round as he tries to work out how to fix his time travel device. He runs to where his modern day hideout is, and at this point in time, it was an abandoned room. He went inside and tried to fix the device. We would then clearly see that a few hours had passed, and still no luck. Out of frustration, Barry punched the table, which caused the emblem to fly into the air and crashes open, revealing a logo. Wayne Enterprises. This would then cause Barry to run over to Gotham, to the Batcave. When he arrived, the Batcave was evidently newer, and the Batmobile was in better condition. No one seemed to be home, so Barry decided to look around. Barry walked in front of the monitors where a map would be displayed, with 3 separate locations. 2 of them with a circular image of Deathstroke, and the other of Joker. Joker's location being the Gotham storage unit for containers. We would then see Barry stand in front of 3 handprint scanners. Now remember, in Batman v Superman, we only saw one, that being Batman's. But because we've gone back in time, there were 2 others that were around with Bruce, Catwoman and Robin. As Barry takes a closer look, he hears a noise from behind him, of something being thrown. As he turns around, now being in flash time, he sees a young Bruce Wayne throwing a batarang towards him. This scene would parallel with the first time Barry and Bruce met in the Snyder Cut. Barry walks around Bruce, analysing his teammate's younger self, whilst holding the batarang. As Barry looks over to where he was standing, he can see a woman around Bruce's age and a younger man roughly around Barry's age slowly charging towards Barry, who was no longer there. We then go into normal time, where we see Robin and Catwoman collide with each other. Barry then lets them know where he is and they start running at him again. Barry says that he is on their side, and we get a comedic sequence of all three of them working together to take down Barry, but because it is in flash time, they are moving really slowly. So Barry just walks the other way. Bruce then tells Robin and Catwoman to stop, and allows Barry to explain why he said he is on their side. Barry does, and proves that Bruce can trust him by explaining what Bruce had told him earlier on in the movie, when they had their heart-to-heart, about his mother and father and the guilt he felt for them dying. Bruce believes him and says,
"So you're fast."
That feels like an oversimplification.
We then have a scene where Bruce asks Barry why is he here and what time is he from. Barry explains everything that we have seen in the film so far and says that he is from 10 years in the future. Bruce explains that they were about to go on a mission to take down Deathstroke and Joker, but if future Bruce thought this mission was worthwhile, then he did too. Bruce agreed to help, and so did Robin. Selina was reluctant, but Bruce took her aside and persuaded her. The plan was for Barry, Robin, and Selina to retrace Barry's steps in an attempt to find something that could give a clue as to who the yellow blur was, whilst Bruce works on fixing the time travel device. When the three of them arrive at where the main part of the fight took place, Barry and Robin get to work analysing the area, whilst Catwoman seems a bit disinterested. Robin notices this and asks her why. She explains that she wants to take down Deathstroke, and the fact that they are helping a stranger instead of taking down their enemy annoys her. They argue whilst Barry continues analysing the area. Then, Barry notices something, some sort of red chemical on the road. Robin walks over, taking out a device that can scan the chemical. Barry recognises the equation of the chemical and asks Robin to reverse it. When reversed, it is the equation for the Speed Force. Barry and Robin together work out that whoever this yellow blur is has a reversed version of Barry's Speed Force abilities. Robin calls over Catwoman to take a closer look, but when there is no response, they both look over, and Selina is gone. She has gone to take down Deathstroke. Now, we've already seen in the Batman v Deathstroke series that Deathstroke and Joker switched places, so the location Selina is going to is either the room filled with explosives or an ambush by the Joker. For our story, she goes to where the Joker is. However, this time, Joker doesn't kill her. Instead, he only kidnaps her. We will find out what exactly happens to her later down the line in the Snyderverse. Just as Barry and Dick are about to leave, Red Lightning surrounds them. He's back. Flash yells at Robin to get back to the Batcave and warn Bruce about Catwoman. Barry then takes off to race after the yellow blur. Another epic fight happens between the two, this time running around the entire world. We would see people looking at blue and red lightning speeding past them. Fighting in every continent around the world, every ocean. We see it all. We would then cut back to Robin at the Batcave. We see Bruce, who has fixed Barry's device. Robin tells Bruce the news, and his face goes as white as a ghost. Scared for her safety, he orders Robin to help him find her. They go out searching, but fail to find anything other than a note from Joker about how Batman will never see her again. Once back at the Batcave, Robin talks about the guilt he feels for losing her. Bruce is evidently angry, mirroring his appearance at Robin's and Catwoman's funeral in the Batman v Deathstroke series. Now, for the events of Batman v Superman and the Snyder Cut to take place, Batman must feel alone and angry. So in this story, Dick Grayson will demand to go and find Catwoman, and not return until he does. This would allow both Catwoman and Robin to be in the modern day universe, whilst allowing the events of Batman v Superman and the Snyder Cut to continue. Throughout Barry's time in the past, he made sure not to tell Bruce too much about the future, in an attempt to keep the timeline as stable as possible. But Bruce, knowing that he will meet Barry in the future, means he is more aware of more powerful beings existing in his universe. However, there will have to be some consequences of Barry meddling with the timeline. The first being that Darkseid's arrival will be delayed. I explained the extensions of the timeline in the previous episode. Another consequence is that in the Aquaman film, Norm, Arthur Curry's half-brother, kills Mera for treason. Aquaman would still become king of Atlantis, but Mera would no longer be a part of the story. Those are just a few of the many things that could happen because of the Flash running back in time and changing past events unknowingly. We then cut back to Barry fighting the Reverse Flash back in Central City. Supersonic punches are being thrown at this point, shattering the glass around them. Thorne is trying to make Barry damage the timeline as much as possible, toying with him, teasing him to damage the timeline even more. Barry, realizing what he is doing, throws Reverse Flash through an empty car and runs away, back to Gotham. We would then see Bruce and Robin sitting down in the Batcave, heads down, visibly upset. Barry arrives and they explain what had happened. Then, Barry explains what has happened to him and how he needs to get back to his time. Bruce hands Barry the repaired device. Barry then says goodbye to Robin and Bruce and activates his repaired time-traveling device and teleports back to the modern day. The device is basically a GPS that directs Barry back to his time. When Barry arrives in the modern day, nothing seems visibly different. Bruce asks Barry if anything actually happened, and Victor cuts in and confirms that he did. Barry explains what had happened and asks them to retell key events to work out what had changed because of his interference with the timeline. The only noticeable differences being Mera's death and the fact that Catwoman was still missing. Robin had returned to Bruce after the news of Steppenwolf's arrival, but was obviously 10 years older than we last saw him. After they had worked out what is different, Cyborg does some diagnostics to make sure Barry is okay. Whilst he runs the diagnostics, Bruce tries to work out who is this mysterious yellow blur. Barry describes the negative speed force he discovered with Bruce. Bruce talks about how he already knew everything Barry had told him because he told him this 10 years ago when they first met. Barry asks Bruce if there was any way to get his father out of prison. Now, in this new timeline, there was a law brought in called the Meta Act. This was due to the Flash and Reverse Flash running through Central City. The government became aware of metahumans and brought in a law to protect families from metahuman attacks, if evidence is provided. Fortunately for Barry, Bruce had kept hold of the evidence of the negative speed force at the scene of Barry's and Reverse Flash's fight. So if he testified in court, he could free his father. But this would reveal a scientific equation on how to create an artificial speed force, which could mean that someone could become a speedster. So this would be how the Reverse Flash would be created. He uses this equation in the future to become the Reverse Flash. The next day, Barry bumps into Iris before walking into court. She says she decided to help out and managed to get some eyewitnesses who saw a yellow blur run out of the Allens' home on the night of Nora's death. This would build the trust between Barry and Iris and would develop their relationship even more. Now, at this point, I'm not quite sure what would happen after this. We could go down the line of Barry having an epic fight with Captain Cold, who broke out of prison, and Barry would end up revealing his identity to his father after saving him, or we could go down the quieter route of Barry and Henry just celebrating after being released from prison. Now for this story at least, Captain Cold will break out of prison thanks to Lex Luthor and will have upgraded weaponry. Luthor, knowing the identity of the Flash, revealed that information to Leonard Snart, who went to hunt Barry down. Barry and Henry were at a local restaurant in celebration of Henry's release, when the room started to become cold and dark, a bit like the effects Dementors have in Harry Potter. Suddenly, the wall cracks open and steps in Leonard Snart. He aims the gun at Barry and fires. Barry moves him and Henry out of the way into the street. Barry, now in his suit, makes sure his father is okay. He then runs back to the restaurant to find Snart. Suddenly, Barry is sent flying with a blast from Cold's new gun. The blue of Barry's lightning, the white of the ice, and the black of the night creates a perfect battleground for this final fight. Now this fight would need to be set in a way that allows Barry to defeat Leonard, but allows him to be in Justice League 2. After Barry defeats Captain Cold, which is much more of a struggle this time, he makes sure that he gets locked in at Iron Heights. The ending of the film would be Barry running out to see his dad, and his father telling him about how he was proud of him. Barry would try to joke about him being the Flash, but wouldn't be able to trick his father. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this ending for the story. It doesn't feel like it has a natural ending. I created multiple versions of this story, but many of them would erase past films like Batman v Superman, which I think is such a monumental film in the DCEU. I wanted to bring back Robin and Catwoman for the future of the Snyderverse, as they were both very popular characters, as well as two characters that I feel deserve to have more screen time. Bringing them back can do that, whilst giving a really strong explanation as to why they are back. I also feel like this version of the Flash wouldn't save his mother and change the timeline, because he seems to understand how time travel works, and from the Snyder Cut, he understands how his powers work. So the Flashpoint story, as amazing as it is, I don't feel like it is suitable for this point in Barry's journey. Also, I think this new story could add a layer of unpredictability to it, but I still feel like the ending is a bit weak. So I am sorry if this story isn't the strongest. I do like it, and I like how it connects back to the Batman series, but also tells a Flash story. The ending doesn't feel like it flows comfortably for viewers, if that makes sense. So if you have an idea for a better ending to this story, please let me know in the comments. The end credits scene would be Eobard Thawne appearing in Lex Luthor's lair. They would talk as if they have met before, and this would set up the next character for the Legion of Doom. So, that is the entire story for my version of the Flash film. Unlike the rumours for the actual Flash film, this wouldn't erase the early DC movies. Instead, I feel like it embraces and enhances the DC stories, whilst building the character of the Flash. We would see Bruce Wayne being a mentor to Barry, when he is younger and older, and we get to see Henry Allen released from prison, as well as setting up two villains for the Flash, and building the relationship between Iris and Barry. Make sure to let me know what you think of this Flash rewrite, and what you would change to make the story better. Also make sure to let me know what you want to see in the Martian Manhunter series, which will be the next episode of Rebuilding the Snyderverse. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon, so until then, have a great day. Bye!